If I caught Zelensky in bed with my girlfriend, I'd ask him how many sugars he took in his coffee, then tuck him in. Slava Ukraini. I'd grab his hips and start thrusting them into my wife so he could rest a little bit. Then I'd get him some breakfast, and hopefully he'd produce a son with balls the size of Crimea, just like he has. Fuck Putin. As you can see, it's been a while since people kicked about the place, hitting out with absolutely cringy shite like this. So people have started to get tired of all this. It's not a trendy thing to keep up with anymore. It's boring, it's miserable, it's war, and war is miserable and depressing and tragic, and people don't want to spend time thinking about that kind of thing, so people just ignore this now. They've moved on, of course, to the Johnny Depp trial and whatever other fucking thing. But this is a good time for me to finally get around to talking about this here, the Kolomoisky-Zelensky connection. So Zelensky is the president of Ukraine and is the wartime president. I just gave a brief summation of what the West thinks about him in the aftermath of the propaganda blitz, before which they had no idea who this guy was. Of course, he was involved in the Trump-Ukraine scandal. He was the Ukrainian counterpart to that scandal. Everyone knows about Trump's side of it, but no one knows. This is it, like, see these blind spots, they're remarkable. No one knew about Zelensky while he was involved in dodgy shit with Trump. Whether that reflects poorly on him or not, they just had no idea, so they couldn't even pass judgment. But now that he is the figurehead of the West, the poster boy of resisting Putin, who is of course the great enemy, the target of the 2 minutes of hate. Everyone knows who Zelensky is now. Like, he's our guy on the front lines. So that was what the narrative was. He's like a superhero. He's Captain America, except from some country that I can't place on a map if my life depended on it. So let's go into this. I was supposed to make this video months ago, I think, but no one has really done this yet. No one has actually just gone over all of this and put it all in the same place in a video. So I'm going to do that. You know who Zelensky is, but do you know who Kolomoisky is? If you don't, then this video is for you. And you're not supposed to know who Kolomoisky is. You're meant to still have absolutely no idea who he is and what he's done and what position he has in Ukrainian politics or in this war. So I'm going to hopefully enlighten you. So this guy, Kolomoisky, in 2021 the US banned him and his family from entering the country due to significant corruption, with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken claiming that he was involved in corrupt acts that undermined rule of law and the Ukrainian public's faith in their government's democratic institutions and public processes, including using his political influence and official power for his personal benefit, and that he poses a serious threat to the future of Ukraine. So here's what he looks like. Here's his face. He's got a chubby, hairy fucking face. Look at that chubby fucking hairy face. What a fat fuck. Ukrainian, Israeli, Cypriot billionaire, business magnate and politician. He's the second or third richest person in Ukraine, and he's one of the main Ukrainian oligarchs. So of course, as these post-Soviet countries were introduced to capitalism, all of their assets were sold off at massive discount, which provided massive returns on small investments from anyone that was in a good position to capitalise at the time. And that included this guy. He founded a private bank, that's one of the main banks in Ukraine, and he's now became a magnate where he has holdings in metals and all this other stuff. He served as the governor of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast from 2014 until his dismissal by President Petro Poroshenko in 2016. That year, following charges against him of large-scale fraud, private bank was taken into state ownership. Kolomoisky's media power and funding supported Zelensky in his successful 2019 presidential campaign and was accused by President Poroshenko of having his former TV channel star in his pocket. In 2021, the United States banned Kolomoisky and his family from entering the country, citing the threat posed by his corrupt practices to the Ukrainian public's faith in democratic institutions. So you already have some illusions here. He owns FC Dnipro. Is this one of the... Nah, I thought that might have been one of the Premier League teams. I think it used to be. During the Soviet era, the club was the second most successful club. Yeah, because I know the name. I think I used to play against them in FIFA. Forced into bankruptcy in 2018. Yeah. Privatised. So he was the owner of this football team, and he oversaw it being run into the dirt. Let's get back to this now. For more than a decade, Kolomoisky siphoned billions of dollars from Private Bank, Ukraine's largest financial institution, which he co-owned, in an audacious laundering scheme, cleaning the money through a web of companies around the world, US federal prosecutors allege. An investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists shows that the Deutsche Bank, the troubled global lender, played a pivotal role transferring more than $750 million to Kolomoisky's business interests in the United States between 2007 and 2013. So he was siphoning money out of Ukraine, and he was laundering it by buying up properties in America. He bought up properties all over northern Illinois, Dallas. He bought 22 buildings across the Midwest, including a skyscraper in Cleveland. So he's just mass buying up properties in America, and they just leave them empty. And he got into a lot of trouble for that, because he would leave them unmaintained, and they would cause health hazards and occupational problems for people as well. So there was a duty of care to these properties and businesses that he didn't adhere to. So, of course, everyone in America hates him because he's just buying properties to stand there. It's just a way to launder money. Verkhovna Rada deputy, bloc of Petro Poroshenko, has said that some 40 million in Private Bank were transferred to the accounts of Kvartal 95 studio belonging to Volodymyr Zelensky. Ariev said funds were transferred when businessman Igor Kolomoisky owned the bank. So he's been given millions to Zelensky's business. That was in 2019. And this was something that appeared in the media in Ukraine around the time of Zelensky's election. His opponents were pointing out these connections during the run-up to the election, and it was causing Zelensky problems. He was having to put out fires. And that's especially remarkable given that Zelensky ran on a platform of taking power away from the oligarchs, dealing with the corruption that's rampant in Ukraine, while he was in the pocket of one of these oligarchs, presumably. As you can already see, seems to be the case. Mr. Pinchuk also claims that Kolomoisky, who's the governor of a region in Ukraine, attempted to pressurise him into abandoning his claim against them by threatening to conscript him into the Ukrainian army to fight in the current war in the East. This was in... when was this? This was in 2015. $2 billion action has been brought by a Kiev-based oligarch friend of Tony Blair against two other Ukrainian billionaires over a company takeover. So there's Kolomoisky there. Mr. Pinchuk suing Kolomoisky, which relates to the ownership of an iron ore mining business. The Pinchuk team alleges Mr. Kolomoisky ordered a Ukrainian lawyer be attacked for refusing to leak details from a client. The gang beat up one of the lawyer's colleagues in a case of his mistaken identity before assaulting the right lawyer, it is alleged. Mr. Kolomoisky then arranged the killing of the gang members who botched the attacks and sought to cover up these murders, the Pinchuk witness statement claims. See how dirty this shit is? Jesus Christ. Mr. Pinchuk's team statement adds that Mr. Kolomoisky and Mr. Bogolyubov have been attempting to embarrass him into dropping the legal case against them by publicising allegations surrounding the murder 15 years ago of a Ukrainian journalist, Georgy Gongadze, during the regime of Mr. Pinchuk's father-in-law, the ex-president Leonid Kuchma. The Pinchuk statement says, for the avoidance of doubt, there's been no suggestion that Mr. Pinchuk was himself involved in the death of Mr. Gongadze. It accuses the two rivals of using their TV station, 1+1, to promote the story in order to pressurise him to drop the High Court case. So they're using their power in media to fight fucking battles against each other. Oligarchs are in standoffs and they're using hitmen and they're mobilising media. However, just as his position in post-revolutionary Ukraine seemed unassailable, Kolomoisky seemed to revert back to the ways of his corporate raider past in the chaotic, violent 1990s. The tycoon, who kept a live 5-metre-long shark in his office that he reportedly fed during meetings to unnerve his guests, had faced allegations of contract killings, intimidation and bravery linked to his business deals, claims he has repeatedly denied. And there's a lot of allegations like this. It's like he's a fucking supervillain, like Blofeld out of James Bond. So we're meant to think that Putin is the actual supervillain antagonist, bad guy when Ukraine does in fact have people like that pulling the strings in their country behind Zelensky. When Kolomoisky's ally and chairman of Ukraine's state-owned oil transport company, Ukrainian Transnafta, was dismissed by Poroshenko in early 2015, the oligarch sent armed men in face masks to storm the firm's headquarters at night. The comedian and the oligarch, Politico, will a media, metal and aviation tycoon be the big winner of the Ukrainian election? That was 2019. While Donbass burns, our city is as quiet as a graveyard, and that's thanks to our governor, Kolomoisky, Dnipro restaurateur. The 52-year-old oligarch, who has big stakes in media, metals and aviation companies in Ukraine, and whom the government has accused of embezzling over $5 billion from his private bank, the nation's largest, before it was forcibly nationalised in 2016, is an unlikely war hero. Kolomoisky denies the accusations of embezzlement and calls the nationalisation an illegal seizure of property without court order or compensation. Appointed governor of his home state of Dnipropetrovsk in East Ukraine in March 2014, he was instrumental in turning back the tide of Russian aggression by spending more than $10 million to create the Dnipro battalion that successfully defended the region from a separatist insurgency. And we'll look at that in a minute. And then another article. One would expect Ukrainian oligarchs and politicians to be made of sterner stuff. Billionaire oligarch and Dnipropetrovsk governor Igor Kolomoisky, however, lost his cool in the late night hours of March 19th to 20th when a reporter of RFE-RL's Ukrainian service, together with other journalists, asked him why he had just spent 6 hours with a group of armed men in the headquarters of the state-owned Ukrainian Transnafta oil transit company. The question by journalist Sergei Andrushko sent Kolomoisky into an expletive-filled rant in which he urged RFE-RL's Ukrainian service, known locally as Radio Svoboda, to go looking for Russian saboteurs rather than tracking his movements. The profanity-laced tirade lasted more than a minute and was caught on video. Ukrainian oligarch tears into RFE-RL journalist.
Хлопці, а ви чому заходите в приміщення, не скажете?
Скажіть, будь ласка, що робить голова обласної адміністрації вночі?
Ну, с тобой хочет увидеться. Другой возможности нет, как тебя увидеть, твое лицо. Радио Свободы. А что ты не спрашиваешь, как рейдерский захват в Укртранснафте произошел? И русские диверсанты сюда попали, а? Что ты об этом не спрашиваешь? А, или тебя Коломойского, блядь, надо увидеть. Мы освобождали здание Укртранснафта от русских диверсантов, которых захватили. А ты со своей свободой сидишь тут, блядь, и караулишь, блядь. Как тёлка, блядь, своего неверного мужа.
Игорь Валерьевич, так что...
Ну что, ты заткнулся уже? Или про паспорта хочешь спросить? Или еще за что-то ты хочешь спросить, а? Давай про русских диверсантов спроси, что ты ни одного не поймал? Радио Свобода, блядь. Ты такая же свобода, блядь, как та, что в парламент не прошла. Тягнебоковская проститутка, блядь.
Проверили документы сейчас, и что вы выяснили?
Документы выяснили, что нет задания на голосование от Кабмина. Нет задания на голосование от НАК «Нефтегаза». Вообще нет никаких документов. Под видом этой самой, как она называется, милиции там или что-то, была какая-то непонятная частная охранная структура. Ворвались, разбили стекла, травмировали людей, поломали кому-то руку. Все, сейчас все испарились. То есть обычная попытка какого-то жалкого рейдерского захвата государственного предприятия. А что я здесь делаю, я тебе потом в прокуратуре расскажу. Понял, свободовец ты? Что ты замолчал?
Ну, а те претензии...
А?
Те претензии как...
Что ты молчишь? Говори давай, вопросы есть у тебя еще? Или язык в жопу засунул? Ну говори, ты ж Свобода, Радио Свобода, знаменитая вещь. Поломала Советский Союз, свергла большевиков. За ООН УПА всегда декларировал. А ты паспорта тут дежуришь? Или что ты еще дежуришь? Или презервативы использованные ты дежуришь? Где твой пидор этот Лещенко? Ну, покажешь ты по своему телевизору или по своему интернету это? Алло, гараж.
А скажіть,
Еду к президенту с вот этими писульками и бумажками. И с его охранной структурой, которая якобы штурмовала. Что все ссылаются, Дымчишин приехал, говорит, у меня команда свит.
I saw something there about passports, and that reminds me of another thing. In Ukraine, it was illegal to have 2 passports. They made that illegal. No one could do that. So what did Kolomoisky do? He got 3 passports. So that's him just goading the state into trying to come after him. Legal loopholes. It says here, in the constitution it says dual citizenship is forbidden, but triple citizenship is not forbidden. Yeah, Kolomoisky said that himself. He has Ukrainian, Israeli and Cypriot passports when Ukrainian law forbids dual citizenship. That's the kind of sleaze he is. So that was the introduction to Kolomoisky, a bit of his background. So that is back in 2014, 2015, and recent events that resulted from it, like his ban from the US. But let's now get into the body of this post, the Zelensky relationship. Of Zelensky has links with the billionaire Igor Kolomoisky, who owns a 70% stake in the TV channel 1+1, which aired Servant of the People, were also scrutinised. This was 2022, just after the war escalated. Zelensky was an actor who played the Ukrainian president on a TV show called Servant of the People until in 2018 he announced he wanted to turn his on-screen persona into reality. After a few years of success, which saw them travel to Moscow and a number of ex-Soviet states, the Kvartal 95 comedy troupe founded its own production company and started making TV shows for the Ukrainian channel 1+1. Alright, so let's find the part where Kolomoisky is mentioned here. Yeah, he has links with the 1+1. Kolomoisky has a 70% stake in that channel, which was also used to bludgeon his oligarchical opponents, his competition in Ukraine. Yeah, and it says here, just 2 months into his presidency, that was when the Trump-Ukraine scandal arose, only 2 months into Zelensky's presidency, and Trump was acquitted of impeachment, of course. Alright, so that's the initial background. Zelensky was a comedian and an actor that wanted to make TV shows, and Kolomoisky's TV channel made agreements and screened his programs. After a self-imposed exile from Ukraine lasting years, Kolomoisky himself had returned to Ukraine just days before Zelensky's inauguration. The billionaire stated that he would not act as a grey cardinal, directing policy from behind the scenes. So that's him putting a disclaimer, saying that he's not going to have power, a grey cardinal. Zelensky capitalised on widespread public anger at corruption, but his 2019 campaign was dogged by doubts over his anti-graft bona fides, given that his campaign was boosted by media belonging to Kolomoisky, who's accused of stealing $5.5 billion from his own bank and funneling it offshore in concert with his partner, Hennady Boholubov. In the heat of the campaign, a political ally of incumbent President Petro Poroshenko published a chart on Facebook purporting to show that Zelensky and his TV production partners were beneficiaries of a web of offshore firms that allegedly had received $41 million in funds from Kolomoisky's private bank. That ally, Vladimir Ariev, didn't provide evidence, but this has been confirmed, and his accusations have never been proven. But the Pandora Papers show that at least some of the details in this alleged scheme correspond to reality. The leaked documents show information on 10 companies in the network that match structures detailed in Ariev's chart. Yep, and that was when? When did this get posted? That was in that was only 4 months ago. And of course the Pandora Papers exposed a lot of these politicians and millionaires and billionaires all over the place. A lot of nefarious offshore accounts from a lot of surprising people, even our own politicians here in the UK. The new documents show that part of the network was managed with help from Fidelity Corporate Services, an offshore consultancy that was one of 14 firms whose documents make up part of the Pandora Papers leak. The documents show that Zelensky and his partners used companies based in the British Virgin Islands, BVI, Belize and Cyprus. Two of Zelensky's associates in the offshore network, who were also part of his TV production company, now hold powerful positions. Sergei Shafir is Zelensky's top presidential aide, while Ivan Bakanov heads the security service of Ukraine. Kolomoisky nominated 30 policymakers to Zelensky's newly established party. Is this Radio Free Europe? No, Kiev Post. So this was June 2021.
Igor Kolomoisky, Ukraine's best-known oligarch, has a complicated history with the president. For years, Zelensky's company has produced shows for Kolomoisky's biggest TV channel, 1+1. In 2019, Kolomoisky's media channels gave a big boost to Zelensky's presidential campaign. After Zelensky's victory, Kolomoisky kept up his relationship with the president, nominating over 30 lawmakers to Zelensky's newly established party, and maintaining influence with many of them in parliament.
So he got Zelensky elected, assisted with it, and in return, he is allowed to nominate policymakers and continue to influence them. And that's despite what he said up here, publicly said that he would not be a Grey Cardinal. Let's find that. Denying that he was a toy in Kolomoisky's hands, the oligarch told the press that he's not the shadow leader or Grey Cardinal either. Ukraine's Grey Cardinal. Kolomoisky has said he would not be the shadow leader of the country and the Grey Cardinal. So it looks like he has. In fact, that was August 2019. The fact that he is afforded decision-making power over the government proves that he is in fact a Grey Cardinal. He has to veto whoever gets in. He decides who gets in and who doesn't, so he can craft a government as he pleases. He gets a say in Ukrainian policy and legislation, and he bought that with his money. It's just a fact. But some of Zelensky's first staffing decisions raised eyebrows, sparking fear that the president might after all be beholden to tycoon Igor Kolomoisky despite repeated denials. Late Tuesday, Zelensky issued a decree choosing as his top aide Andrei Bogdan, until now Kolomoisky's personal lawyer. So he has Kolomoisky's main lawyer as his own aide. Zelensky has shrugged off accusations that he is a front for the interests of Kolomoisky, who owns the television channel that broadcasts the new president's shows. So there's denials coming from both sides, but evidence suggests that they're liars. Just 2 months into his presidency, he faced direct allegations of corruption when he became embroiled in the scandal that would put former US President Donald Trump on trial for impeachment. It emerged that Mr. Trump had tried to bribe Ukraine into helping him, Rudy Giuliani and then Attorney General William Barr to investigate his opponent, and now President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Ukrainian officials didn't give in to the US threat of withholding millions in aid, and Mr. Trump was later acquitted of impeachment. And then over here, even the car Zelensky uses belongs to a company owned by one of Kolomoisky's companies.
Billionaire Ihor Kolomoisky has provided security.
Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. So this is a broadcasting agency, has existed for decades, and is there to influence public perceptions in Europe. This is a long-standing propaganda outlet to further US interests in Europe. It's existed for decades, been doing this for decades. And even they're saying here,
lawyers and vehicles for Zelensky. His bodyguard accompanied Zelensky on the campaign trail. The car Zelensky uses belongs to a company owned by one of Kolomoisky's companies. And Kolomoisky's lawyer is now working for Zelensky's campaign. When the results of the first round of the election became clear...
So, he even has to borrow his car from Kolomoisky. Didn't you get rid of these companies when you became the establishment? Still paying dividends to Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife. completely clash with the image with which he got himself elected. Might have to edit this one seems like it's incomplete.
So world leaders, powerful politicians, billionaires, celebrities, religious leaders, even drug dealers, all targeted for hiding their investments in mansions, exclusive beachfront homes, yachts and other assets. It's according to a review of nearly 12 million files from around the world. It's the latest report by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists involving 600 journalists, naming people like the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, Jordan's King Abdullah, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and the German supermodel Claudia Schiffer. Also implicated, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And earlier I spoke to our correspondent in Kiev, Gulliver Crown.
The papers reveal that Volodymyr Zelensky's production company Kvartal 95 and numerous people associated with it and with him used offshore companies in order to store the money that they had earned for many years before Volodymyr Zelensky was elected president. There is no indication in these papers that this money was earned illegally, and already one of Volodymyr Zelensky's associates has been defending that practice, saying it was the only way to stop the money being targeted by corporate raiders in Ukraine's corrupt establishment. But then when this person was asked in the film made by Ukrainian journalists, why didn't you get rid of these companies when you became the establishment, he said, well, we're doing it, but it's a slow process. There is one aspect of this, though, where Volodymyr Zelensky could be seen as being on the wrong side of the law, and that is that there is one of these companies which he apparently passed to his associate, Sergei Shefir, when he was elected without any money changing hands, but that company is now, according to the papers, belonging perhaps indirectly to Sergei Shefir, but still paying dividends to Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife. If that's true, then that is perhaps illegal. But there isn't really a huge smoking gun here about Volodymyr Zelensky engaging in illegal activity. The thing is, though, is that all these arrangements with offshore companies, huge wealth and so on, completely clash with the image on which he got himself elected, which was the image based on this fictional character that he played in a sitcom of a man of the people who becomes president precisely because he's so sick of the elite and their vast wealth hidden abroad in offshores.
So dividends that do not belong to Zelensky are going to Zelensky, and dividends are the liquidation of market capitalization of a company. So when you own shares in a company and you're paid dividends, you are being given liquidated ownership of that company. So it's as if you own the company and you're liquidating it. That's what that is. So if he doesn't own those shares but is being paid dividends, then that's tantamount to him owning the shares and liquidating them slowly. So he's benefiting financially when he shouldn't be. That's what that means. And this is all because in Ukrainian law, I think you have to forgo ownership of any companies in order to assume presidency so that there's no conflict of interest. And the way that they dealt with that was to give away all of his ownership, so someone else gets to hold it, and presumably it'll be returned to him. But the fact that he's being paid dividends in the meantime, it's really shady. It's really pushing his luck. Kolomoisky's media outlet also provides security and logistical backup for the comedian's campaign, and it has recently emerged that Zelensky's legal counsel, Andrei Bogdan, was the oligarch's personal lawyer. Investigative journalists have also reported that Zelensky travelled 14 times in the past 2 years to Geneva and Tel Aviv, where Kolomoisky is based in exile. Neither man could be reached for comment. So Kolomoisky lives in exile, but Zelensky is visiting him. Imagine your future president visiting an exiled pariah that's been banned from the US and banned from Ukraine, that's fiddling around with multiple passports, multiple citizenships, in order to be able to go and do what he wants. Alright, so that's the background. That is the relatively innocuous stuff. Now it gets ugly and it starts to connect to the current war. The right-wing neo-Nazi paramilitary sponsoring. These forces were privately funded by oligarchs, the most well-known being Igor Kolomoisky, an energy magnate billionaire and then governor of Dnipropetrovsk region. In addition to Azov, Kolomoisky funded other volunteer battalions such as Dnipro 1 and Dnipro 2, Aidar and Donbass units. People think that it's just Azov, but it's not. There's a lot of these battalions and regiments all over the Donbass. I was reading about them fighting battles on airports back in 2014. All of these fucking weird paramilitary groups. There are over 30 pro-nationalist volunteer battalions similar to IDAR, such as Ukraina, DND, Metinvest and Kiev 1, all funded by private investors. All funded by private investors. I should really put this here. Jesus. That's shocking. The IDAR battalion is publicly backed by Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, who also allegedly funds the Azov, Donbass, Dnieper 1, Dnieper 2 volunteer battalions operating under orders from Kiev. Orders from Kiev, so there's a lot of political favours being exchanged in return for money. Last spring, Kolomoisky offered a bounty of $10,000 of his own money for each captured Russian saboteur. A warrant for Kolomoisky's arrest was issued in Russia in July for organising the killing of civilians through his sponsorship of volunteer militants. According to the government, these volunteers always operate under an overall command and control of one of their regular forces. Amnesty International told Newsweek. Amnesty's report, however, indicates Kiev's loose regulation on volunteer groups, and its members act with virtually no oversight or control. Amnesty has asked Kiev to clarify the legal status and affiliation of its volunteer battalions and fully integrate them into clear chains of command, making all of its servicemen aware of international law and implementing effective investigations into abuses of human rights. Meanwhile, Norwegian channel TV2 presented footage yesterday of the Azov battalion flying flags with the symbols of Ukraine's neo-Nazi party, Patriot of Ukraine. This is the first instance of government-backed volunteers displaying far-right tendencies. However, numerous powerful paramilitary groups are reportedly involved in the Ukrainian conflict, such as Patriot of Ukraine, Right Sector and White Hammer. And this was 2014, September. Yep, I was reading all about this back then. This is all familiar to me. Azov received early funding and assistance from another oligarch, Sergei Taruta, the billionaire governor of Donetsk region. Al Jazeera. Who are Ukraine's far-right Azov regiment? March 2022, so this is just after the war. In 2015, Andrei Dachenko, the spokesperson for the regiment at the time, said that 10 to 20% of Azov's recruits were Nazis. The unit has denied it adheres to Nazi ideology as a whole, but Nazi symbols such as the swastika and SS regalia are rife on the uniforms and bodies of Azov members. For example, the uniform carries the neo-Nazi Wolfsangel symbol, which represents a black swastika on a yellow background. The group said it is merely an amalgam of letters N and I which represent national idea. Yeah, bullshit. Human rights violations and war crimes. 2016 report by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has accused the Azov regiment of violating international humanitarian law. The report detailed incidents over a period from November 2015 to February 2016 where the Azov had embedded their weapons and forces in unused civilian buildings and displaced residents after looting civilian properties. The report also accused the battalion of raping and torturing detainees in the Donbass region. And of course, you now have American crowds in New York chanting "We love Azov."
But not only Azov. National Guard, Національна гвардія України також, поліція, батальйони морської піхоти.
So that's the retarded Americans back in 24th of April. That was in New York. And did you see the save there as well by the guy on the loudspeaker? But not only Azov. Well, Azov are who they're chanting for. So they're quite specific about who they approve of, and it's the neo-Nazi battalion. That's America in 2022. The militia unit, nicknamed Kolomoisky's Battalion, is funded by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine and also through the charitable organisation Fund Dnipro 1. Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, who was the governor of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast during the 2014 pro-Russian conflict in Ukraine, is believed to have spent $10 million to create the unit. On 24th of December 2014, Amnesty International reported that the unit was blocking humanitarian aid sent from Ukraine by another Ukrainian oligarch, Rinat Akhmetov, reaching the population in the separatist-controlled areas. Over half the population in these areas depend on food aid. The reason the aid is being blocked by the Dnipro, Aidar and Donbass battalions is that the battalions believe food and clothing are ending up in the wrong hands and may be sold instead of being given as humanitarian aid. Denis Krivoshev, acting director of Europe and Central Asia for Amnesty International, stated that using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is a war crime. And this is Dnipro 1 Regiment. Special Tasks Patrol Police Regiment subordinated to Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. The regiment is based in Dnipro. Human rights violations and war crimes. 2014 to present, they've been active patrol police tactical unit, involved in the war in Donbass and the Battle of Ilovaisk. Yeah, and this is what I remember doing. I was sitting reading all of these conflicts and just going through all of the battalions here. So you've got a population that depends on food aid, external food aid. So they're being bombed by the Ukrainian army, and then you have neo-Nazi paramilitaries that do the actual dirty work of blocking the food. Kolomoisky's bank also offered a highly publicised reward of $10,000 for the capture of pro-Russian separatists. The pro-Russian demonstrations swiftly dwindled in number until none were being organised. Hardcore Moscow supporters like Oleg Zarev, local parliament member, were chased out of town with bounties on their heads, with a $500,000 reward being offered by private bank for Zarev's capture. He has decided to cool his heels in Moscow. His palatial residence in the centre of the city has been taken over by the government and turned into a refugee centre for displaced citizens from the east. Dnipropetrovsk will become a second Stalingrad for those who want war here, and the Ukrainians will win, threatened Deputy Governor Gennady Korban said on television. While these bold initiatives have stanched the separatist threat by now, Kolomoisky is not taking any chances. He's also spent over $10 million creating his own citizen militia, the Dnipro Battalion, which has been supplied with SUVs, semi-automatics and new uniforms. The governor's private army has set up armed checkpoints around the city and now controls traffic into and out of the city. It also makes forays into separatist territory and was reportedly behind the separatist massacre in the nearby Mariupol after pro-Russians took control of a police station. The entire station was burned down, just like happened in Odessa in 2014, along with those inside. While these strong-arm tactics have been criticised by some, the governor enjoys strong support from the local population, who said, reportedly, "I don't care if he's like Hitler, as long as he prevents war coming here," says a local restaurateur, and this was Daily Beast in July 2017. So he funds neo-Nazi paramilitaries, he launders money by stealing and embezzling, and he forces political favours. He tries to evade legal accountability and get around laws that lesser people have to abide by. This guy's a piece of shit, and Zelensky is in bed with him and always has been. Zelensky would not be where he is without this guy. And this guy is being buoyed by his closeness to Zelensky. So Zelensky is just a puppet. Zelensky is just being puppeted by this guy and by everyone else that has power over him and control over him and that he owes favours to, like the US. Ukraine has sold itself out to the US and to these oligarchs. So let's go back to where we started this video. If I caught Zelensky in bed with my girlfriend, I'd ask him how many sugars he took in his coffee, then tuck him in. Slava Ukraini. I'd grab his hips and start thrusting them into my wife so he could rest a little bit. Then I'd get him some breakfast and hopefully he'd produce a son with balls the size of Crimea just like he has. Fuck Putin. Oh, and then your wife would pass around. And sloppy seconds would go to Kolomoisky. And then it would go to all the other cronies and oligarchs. And all the corrupt pieces of shit named in the Pandora Papers. You would just sell yourself out completely. And this is the kind of shit that was going on back when consent for this war was actually being manufactured in February. This is the sentiment that was being fabricated, constructed. These are the narratives that the propaganda was supporting. Isn't this just pathetic? And things are not much better now. This is how it started out, and this is how it'll end. The most pathetic shit imaginable.